to this corporate overview and scrutiny committee. We are obviously holding it remotely due to government advice at this point. Can I ask everyone to make sure their phones are switched off? And if anybody's got an urge to wash dishes, don't. Those of us that were here this morning in the quarterly review will know why. If you wish to speak, I do have a list of questions already and people who want to ask questions, but just key it in on there and I'll call you in, okay? Right, I'll hand over now to Meryl to present the apologies for today's meeting. Thank you. Thank you, Meryl.
Hi, Chair. Sorry, it's Rachel.
Rachel, I am sorry.
Hello, that's okay. Meryl is due to update you, but she's having a few connection problems at the moment. She's just messaged me. So I will ask her for a quick update now. Thank you.
It's all right. I could hear my dog barking, but my husband shut the door on her. Right. Sorry, Rachel.
That's okay, Chair. Yes, she's having a few problems getting online, so she's going to try it again, and I'll update you shortly. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Right. We'll go into declarations of interest now. Then, are there any declarations of interest? Just key in if you've got anything to declare. No. All right. Chair. I'll take that as no. Sorry.
Chair, if I could come in, please. We do have apologies from Councillor Shaw for this afternoon.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Andrew. Right, we'll move to the minutes of the 20th of the 1st initially, and can I have a mover and a seconder that they are a correct record?
Move the correct, Chair.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
Okay, all agreed?
Right.
Okay. The minutes of the 4th of February 2020. Mover and seconder, please.
Move the correct. It's all quiet there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, John. Second. Okay. Yeah. And finally, the minutes of the 13th of February 2020. Move. Can I have a mover? Okay, thank you, John. Seconder?
Second.
Right, thank you. Right, we'll now move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the establishment of a cross-party recovery panel for COVID-19 pandemic. Mark, will you be speaking to this? It's a nice, concise report, and we've all read it, but if there's anything you would like to particularly draw our attention to, I know we're awaiting some legal advice before we move into the questions.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, I'll just pick up some salient points. I won't spend too long, because I'm sure there are lots of questions. So obviously the purpose of the report is to establish a cross-party recovery panel, as I say, with the aim of shaping, informing and advising Cabinet, ultimately, on the Council's recovery planning, recognising the huge challenges we face post-COVID-19 as we begin to ease the lockdown and move out of that phase. I won't dwell on the background because we're all familiar with it, because we've all lived with it for the last 4 months, but suffice to say that as far as the Council is concerned, as far as the organisation is concerned, change has been very, very significant. We haven't furloughed any staff, but understandably, a lot of services have been run differently. There's been a lot of home working, agile working, a lot of redeployment of staff, and our focus has very much been on the delivery of essential services with the aim of protecting the most vulnerable in the county borough and, of course, stopping the spread of the virus as well and playing our part in that. And as part of that, and this is an unfortunate consequence. Of course, we had to have emergency governance procedures, which has meant that to some extent the involvement of some members through the normal processes of scrutiny have obviously been suspended, although I did set out in full in my Cabinet report of June the 30th that we have endeavoured to keep everyone as involved and as informed as possible through a process of weekly group leaders meetings, meetings with scrutiny chairs, as well as an enhanced programme of comms on a daily basis to let people know what's going on, and of course the circulation of the formal decisions as well that have been made under those emergency arrangements. So again, I won't dwell on that full report that went to Cabinet on June the 30th, but you'll know that it set out a planning framework for the restart, recovery and renewal of the Council's services. A key part of the recovery element was the establishment of this cross-party panel, recognising that the input of elected members of all parties will be crucial if we are to establish a credible plan on a one council basis. What I've done within the actual report is again listed under 3.4 some of the key priorities and considerations that we will need to deal with as part of our recovery. Now, you'll note here that they actually fall in different timelines. So some of these things are fairly immediate, others will clearly take a longer period, and that's perhaps one of the challenges really, is that our recovery is not about all things happening in one go. It's about a programme of work which may take even up to 12 to 18 months to complete. But you can see that immediately we have the challenge of reopening schools in September, and Lindsay would have issued details last week to members and to the schools about what our plans are around that. We know that the response to the economic crisis is going to be an ongoing thing. So again, within the Cabinet report, we talked about the formation of a recovery task force, which would predominantly be made up not of us, not of officers, not of members, but actually of people from within businesses and industry within the area to help formulate what we need to do and how we best invest on that basis. And then I won't go through every one of them, but if you look through that list in 3.4, you can see the significance of some of the challenges. So I'll just pick some up. Homelessness, for example. There's an expectation from Welsh Government that some of the things that we did during lockdown in largely finding places for homeless people to live during that period, that we find not necessarily the same solutions, but alternative solutions for that moving forward. Now, that is challenging both as a concept, but also financially as well. We know during the lockdown that we formed better relationships with some of our partners, in particular people like Barvo. Again, how do we nurture some of that to ensure it endures moving forward, and what sort of part can that play in our recovery so that we don't just revert to how things as they were previously, recognising the advantages that might have to us within our communities, and again potentially financially as well. We know that some things that were very new to us in March, for example, the provision of PPE, are probably here to stay for the time being. So how can we not only recover, but how can we ensure that we're resilient moving forward as part of that recovery in case there is a second peak or indeed anything else that may cause us to revert in a local lockdown, or something that may cause us to revert to some emergency procedures moving forward. Some of the other things are already underway. We know that most waste services are now almost back to normal. We know that we're beginning to reopen some of our libraries, but again, that doesn't preclude them having a different role moving forward as community hubs. And finally, just in that list of 3.4, we know about both the risks and indeed the opportunities around digital services. So we know that people have more readily embraced digital services during lockdown. How much of that can we keep? But also how can we still ensure that we protect those that find it more difficult to access services in that way? So a whole range of initial issues there, just to flag up really, but I'm sure there are others as well. I think the other thing I then just wanted to draw attention to, Chair, was just really the fact that this recovery panel, I suppose, is task and finish, and some of its recommendations need to come forward reasonably quickly, as I described. And I think in doing that, therefore, we probably also need to use our resources widely and avoid duplication. So we already know that the PSB intend carrying out a community impact assessment, and they're very keen to work with this panel about what that might mean and what we might need to prioritise on the basis of that assessment, and they intend to do that very quickly. We also know the Wales Audit Office have offered their support to potentially again support this panel, perhaps looking at best practice elsewhere, or indeed any other way that you think they may be able to add value. So I think there's something for me about making sure we don't duplicate, and the other part of that is we already know that we have a similar panel around budget, the Brett panel, and again, just making sure that we don't duplicate our work and instead we coordinate and collate that work in a cohesive way to inform Cabinet overall. So ultimately, Chair, and the last few things I want to say really, I envisage this panel as a flexible and agile panel. I said something earlier on to you directly. I mean, for me, it's about what works best. I think in the terms of reference that are referred to in 4.2, it talks about the group meeting monthly. However, I believe it's a matter for you how often you meet, even as subgroups, in order to get the business done, if you like. Because ultimately the whole reason for doing it in this way is that we weren't then hamstrung by the 4 or 6 week cycle of scrutiny meetings where reports are required in advance. You could probably react much more flexibly. You could invite people to meet the panel, either all of it or some of it, on an ongoing basis, whether they're key officers, key members, or indeed external stakeholders. But the real point was that you could quickly come up with some key recommendations that will improve the resilience of the Council's recovery plan, improve our responsiveness, and of course make sure we make the right decisions when we come to potentially reset our MTFS and our corporate plan, looking at them through a COVID lens. So that's really what I wanted to say, Chair. So I try to keep that reasonably brief, but I hope that's helpful as context.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. I've got a number of people that wish to ask questions lined up already. In the main about composition, but I'll go to Councillor Ross Thomas first, please.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I know we've had a pre-discussion and it'll probably take place in this meeting as well around the political makeup and the numbers of this committee. But Mark, I'm really pleased to see you recognise that in particular some of the things that will come to panel that we'll want to discuss will need recommendations quite quickly. I've said in the pre-meeting that I don't expect Bridgend County Borough Council to be hanging around for 6 to 12 months or for however long we decide to convene this task and finish group 4 while waiting for recommendations from us, because the recovery begins now, or probably has done already, certainly since the Cabinet meeting anyway. So I'm just really, I mean, it was a query that I'd raised earlier on, but really pleased to see you recognise that some recommendations will be coming from conversations that members are having. Some of us work in industry where best practice is being shared as well, which would be useful for the local authority going forward. So I suppose I'm just wondering, in terms of time frames, obviously tying in with decision-making processes. The wonderful thing about local authorities is that no one person can say that they know all best practice, and it's great that we can all get together to share that. So I'm just wondering how this panel can feed into the timeframes that work around decision-making processes, maybe around Cabinet, so that recommendations that are timely and very time-sensitive can be put forward. I just think that's something that we need to be very mindful of, so that time isn't wasted in between meetings.
If I may, Chair, are you happy for me to answer?
Yes, certainly, Mark, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas, and again, it's a point well made. I suppose I would think that some of your initial recommendations would need to come forward potentially at the next meeting of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which I think is scheduled for September, ideally to inform potentially Cabinet and Council reports towards the end of September, where we, at the moment, envisage having a look at our budget reset and also the corporate plan reset. So there's other work going on. I've asked each service area to review what worked well during the lockdown, what worked less well, where did they spend extra money, where did they save money, what investment would they now require, and what operating model would they look to utilise moving forward. So that, together with anything you produce in addition, would be helpful within that initial time frame to inform those key documents, and more importantly perhaps inform where the council spends its money and invests its money, if if that's going to change. However, I also, just to be clear, I'm not expecting you to do every single thing in that time frame. I think it's what you said, Councillor Thomas. I think it's recognising there are some things that need to come forward quite quickly. There are others that inevitably will take longer and will feed perhaps through into maybe even next year's MTFS or next year's corporate plan thinking for Cabinet to consider on that basis. So I think it's a bit of a two-pronged attack, really. I think there's stuff that we know that if you take too long to do it, you'll have missed the boat. But there's other stuff which perhaps not just plays to recovery, but also probably plays to that renewal phase that I talked about in the Cabinet report. And you may make some recommendations about some of the longer term thinking that you think the Council should embrace as part of that. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. I think Councillor Nora Clark has a supplementary on this.
I've just written that down, Mark. Obviously, that's meant to be, will we as a panel be able to see the feedback that you were talking about? I think that's coming in at the end of July.
Yes, I think it would be helpful if you saw that. Obviously, we'll need a little bit of time to collate that and make it into something that's readable and meaningful. But I think that would logically be something that would inform your thinking. Certainly, I envisage that there will be a whole range of recommendations from services, some of which, of course, we won't be able to do. I think we need to acknowledge that. There will be some thinking in there that I think will help you and help shape and inform whatever recommendations you make as well. So absolutely, it'd be our intention to share them in a timely manner with you.
Okay, thank you.
For that, Mark. The next person I've got scheduled to ask a question is Councillor Tom Gifford.
Hi. Basically, the line of question I had was to do with the composition, I suppose. And I know a lot of members have got questions about composition, and I understand we're waiting on kind of legal advice on it, so you may not be able to be in a position to do it. But I know members raised concerns about, or thought that it might be prudent to increase the size of this committee from 12 to 16. I think another proposal was that it doesn't necessarily have to mirror the corporate overview and scrutiny panel, for example. And the third thing was something which you've already touched on, is the kind of flexibility around the frequency of meetings as well. So just basically, are those all things you're open to?
If I deal them in reverse order, I mean, absolutely on the flexibility of the panel, I think it's a matter for you, because they don't require the normal rigmarole around papers and translation and whatever else. So if you feel that you can meaningfully, fill a meeting a week or whatever it is, then so be it. So I think that genuinely is a matter for you, and I would actually encourage you to be proactive and seek to meet more regularly. You may want to call, as the terms of reference set out, you may want a monthly meeting of bringing everyone back together. If, for example, some of those in-between meetings don't include everyone. But again, I'm not dictating that. That's a matter for you. But you may choose to allocate certain tasks to certain members. Because my only concern, if I come to your other point about increasing the size of the panel, is it depends how you operate. Because, of course, if you're suddenly trying to get 16 people together twice a week, for example, I imagine you're going to run into difficulties straight away. So I think it depends. I think those two things sort of overlap a little. The final point, as you say, I can't really advise on, because while I'm at one level, I've already given my view that for me it's whatever works. There is clearly a constitution that we need to abide to. This is a panel of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Whether that means that it has to be made up of those members, I genuinely don't know, Councillor Gifford, and we'll await Kelly's advice on that. What would have to happen is that it would have to be politically balanced, and there's always a challenge in that. But I suppose my only thought just on your three questions put together is just have a think about whether one inadvertently affects the other. In other words, if you're going to insist that every member comes to every panel, I think Andrew will tell you, trying to arrange any meeting where we get 16 members to all agree to a date would be almost impossible. So it might be about your working practices and your operating model may influence that a little.
Thank you for that, Mark. I think Councillor Nicole Burnett. Yes, you are next.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I was just thinking after our pre-meeting, really, that would it be, if we want to increase the numbers of the panel, which I do agree it is sometimes difficult to get enough of us together to be effective. I think, as I suggested earlier, that if we can set meeting dates and times so that we can plan well in advance and make sure that we are available, but having enough of us and that consistency of people to deal with issues is going to be really important. So swapping and changing members, I don't feel is relevant, but if we were to increase members on, just a suggestion that I just thought of is are we able to invite the mayor and the deputy mayor? I know these are non-political roles, but my thoughts really are that the mayor and the deputy mayor have spent the last year getting to know the county and stakeholders, and without the monthly meetings they still have a role to play and a civic role to play, and would their perspectives be useful for us moving forward?
I've literally just received some legal advice. I think Andrew and Rachel might have as well. Shall I read it out, Chair, and then it'll probably help?
Yes, please, Mark. Yes, please do.
This is from Laura Griffiths. It says, "Hi all, as discussed with Merrill, the panel can comprise further members, but I would advise that these additional members are nominated by the group leaders, and it should be politically balanced. You will also need to amend the terms of reference during the meeting, as this makes reference to just the members of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee."
Thank you very much for that, Mark. I think that does make things very plain. And if that's the legal advice, I imagine that is what we're going to accept without question. But what I'm really interested in, Mark, at this moment in time is achieving an agreement in principle. How we go about that then can be a matter for further discussion, further advice, etc. It's just, we only had 8 members in our pre-meeting. Now, I do appreciate that 16 members may well, there will be people who won't be able to attend, but you get that with 12 members. But we would invariably manage to get at least 10 or 11 present if we had 16. We don't do it currently. Okay. So I mean, I think that's what we're really looking for. And I'm going to bring in Councillor Tim Thomas now, because he had a view on this as well. Tim?
Sorry, Chair, what did you just say then? I missed that little bit you just said.
I'm sorry. We had a question on the increased numbers. Yeah. I just wanted to, did you want to come in at this point? Now that we've had the legal advice, that yes, we can expand it, and the advice as to how we expand it, was there anything further to your comment in the pre-meeting that you'd like to add at this point?
My comment was around the use of expert witnesses. Can I bring that in? Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks all. Thanks, Chair. I welcome Mark's comments that this panel is going to be quite an agile and flexible panel. I agree with lots of the comments that members have made on increasing the size, and I think it would be fair to have substitutes. A quick comment from Councillor Burnett about the mayor's role in this. I think we'd have to appreciate that the mayor's position would change midway through this process. So I think it would have to be the position of the mayor being included rather than the person, if you see what I mean.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
But I just wanted some clarity really on the use of expert witnesses, because we've obviously got to use, there's obviously some specific sectors and industries that need our support, and they're going to be in quite a perilous situation post-COVID. Is the intention really to bring expert witnesses on and to garner their views as well? Because that would be quite contrary to what BREP is about. BREP is obviously quite confidential. So what I'm exploring at really here is the role of expert witnesses and the actual confidential nature of the committee as well. Is it going to be open and transparent as well? And opinions of the communities in terms of recovery are put in place in terms of processes and activities. So I'm just wondering how we're also going to get community views on board as well.
Mark, would you like to comment on?
I'm conscious as well that because I read the legal advice out, I didn't really answer Councillor Burnett's question, so I'll try and pick that up as well. Essentially, it seems based on the legal advice that if the Mayor, for example, were to be invited as an additional member of the panel, that would be down to the group leader, the relevant group leader, and it would seem that that was the process that we've been advised of. So it can increase from 12 to 16 if that's your desire, but it'd be a matter for the group leaders to make nominations. But then there would also have to be that exercise of still ensuring political balance. In terms of Councillor Thomas's questions, 2 or 3 things there. Absolutely, you may want to invite expert witnesses. My caution is don't bite off more you can chew here. This has to be agile and quick and responsive. So if you start trying to invite lots of people that are going to have lots of time limits, for example, people from Public Health Wales or wherever, what I would imagine is they may not be able to come in the times that you need to work in, which is the original point. So I think just it's a balance really. And similarly, when we talk about increasing the number of meetings, bear in mind it's not just you that need to be available. It may also be the relevant officer, the relevant cabinet member, or the relevant stakeholder, or whoever it is that you intend inviting. So there's a bit of a challenge in doing that. And then the final point on that as well, and I think the reason the terms of reference were written as they were, is that obviously on a monthly basis, I think it's felt that the scrutiny officers can service the meeting and ensure that the minutes are recorded. I think if you have additional meetings in between, it may well be that they are information gathering meetings, but they may not be able to be serviced in the same way. So you may have to, relevant members or the membership may have to bring that information back to that monthly meeting to ensure that all of that information is brought together. So there are some logistical issues to overcome there as well. But the fundamental question about expert witnesses, yes. The other question about confidential, yes, it is confidential, but that's not a problem in bringing a witness in to ask for their views. But it is confidential, and it's intended that it will remain confidential because that's the basis on which the panel has been established. And obviously, we're respecting that members keep that confidentiality until such time as the cabinet finally agrees whatever it is that's put before them.
Thank you for that, Mark. Do you wish to come back, Tim or Nicole?
Very, very quickly. Again, it's on flexibility, and I really welcome Mark's and colleagues' comments on flexibility and the urgent need to respond quickly. My understanding is that the committee is going to advise the cabinet. There might be some instances, however, where we might want to jump cabinet or at least cabinet work with us very quickly, because it might be more desirable to advise Welsh Government or even UK Government in some circumstances. For example, I'm a little bit concerned that if we do go into scenarios where we have local lockdowns, do we have the resources to deal with local lockdowns, particularly things like dealing with local furloughing schemes, for example, because we're going to need financial incentives for people who would have otherwise been going to work but are being told to stay at home. So I'm just wondering really a bit more comments on that flexibility really in terms of report mechanisms.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my view would be that you may wish to call in the leader, who of course is here and may want to come in a minute anyway,
yes.
or indeed any other cabinet member to ask on a specific topic. To take your example of local furloughing, that's far more likely to be something that government would have to fund than it is the local authority. So if there was a local lockdown in Bridgend and certain people couldn't work, we would probably expect there to be some sort of governmental support for that scenario. But as I say, I come back to I think there's clearly an excitement and ambition to contribute, which I think is great. I said my only caution is I wouldn't make this so big that you can't deal with it. I mean, you've got to be focused, you've got to prioritise, and you've got to be aware of the timelines. Would be my advice.
Thank you, Mark. I am going to bring the leader in now. He has indicated he wishes to speak, so I'll hand over to you, Hugh.
Thanks for that, Chair.
Just on Councillor Thomas's point around inviting in expert witnesses from the business sector, and as Councillor Thomas has said, some of those businesses are very fragile. I would remind colleagues that we will be setting up the task force, the economic task force, and its primary role will be to engage and work with businesses to plan the economic recovery of the borough. So that will be the opportunity for the business sector in particular to engage with the local authority. That said, there will be different expert witnesses that I'm sure the group would want to invite in. I think it's an interesting point around the public. The only difficulty with that would be if you wanted to hear directly from the public is how you would make that representative. I would argue that you're the representatives of the public as members, and you'll be that voice for the public. But you may want to think about how you use the citizens panel actually to get because that's something we're looking at as well. Collectively, we look together at the citizens panel because we've worked hard over many years. You've worked hard and we've all worked hard to make that a representative voice, because we try and make sure it represents the diverse county borough in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, geographical distribution, and that's a mechanism that is tried and tested as a way of sounding out what the public think. So I'd just flag that up as a potential mechanism for gauging the views of the public beyond our role as elected representatives. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Hugh. That's very interesting. I've got Councillor John Spanswick listed here. John, you still wish to come in?
Yes, please, Chair.
Yeah.
I don't know, my video has gone kaput. I don't know what's happened there. Anyway, you can hear me,
yeah?
Yeah?
Hear you.
Okay. Yeah, it's on the topic we haven't been mentioned so far, and it was very high on the agenda at the start of the pandemic, and that's the value of our green spaces, our parks, our open spaces. Nationally, that was recognised as essential. People be out using our parks. Looking through the cabinet report and the report we have today, there's lots of essential, vital stuff in there that's going to be dealt with, but very little mention of long term how we're going to sort of protect our open spaces, our green spaces, even enhance them. And accept the fact that there's asset transfers and things where they take place and they want to take place. But I think we've got a central role as local authority in securing and protecting our green spaces in the future. The Public Service Board have done a survey on use of green spaces during COVID. There'll be feedback in due course. The emerging LP has got, and the team behind it, have got a real good understanding of the value of green spaces and do some great work there. And there are some town and community councils who are interested in doing stuff. But it's still a non-statutory service. And I'm slightly disappointed that I find very little recognition in any of the reports so far mentioning how we're going to deal with that long term. And I think it needs to be perhaps in there somewhere.
Can I come back on that, Chair? I think you've made the point yourself, Councillor Spandic. Absolutely, that's a long-term goal, but this report is very much focused on the immediate short-term recovery. Welsh Government, in terms of the medium to long term, have identified the need for a green recovery, and that is an aspiration we certainly share, and that's a range of different ways that we can make sure that the recovery is sustainable, and that includes green space in its wider sense. So potentially, for example, tree planting, because that can manage with that can be helpful in terms of flood management, as well as providing green lungs. as well as providing jobs in the short term as well. So Welsh Government are looking at that, and that's something we're also tuned into. The report isn't comprehensive. It's not going to be, is it? And it's not long term, but it is an area we will be looking at, and we can use members' expertise like your expertise, Councillor Spanzik, in terms of shaping that future area. And there's a number of themed areas that Welsh Government are looking at, and what we can do is make sure that that report, I think it's a public report, is shared with members, because of course they are a crucial partner for us. Thank you, Chair. Can I just...
Thank you. Yes, you can come back, John.
Thank you, Leader. I appreciate that, and I understand where, the long term. What I'm trying to get at is the resource issue within BCBC to make a lot of these things happen, where there's tree planting, where there's even future plan applications. It needs officers on the ground, and and that's the area, due to austerity and due to the financial cutbacks, there isn't that. Like the example I give you is when there's any planning applications these days for any large developments, there'll be very, very rare will there be comments from the park section about open spaces, because the staff there haven't got the capacity to do it. So we have a capacity issue within the county borough, long term, to be able to help advise and organise these things for the future green spaces. And that's something I think would be building into the future financial plans.
Thank you for that, John. Yeah, I think we appreciate both sides here, that there have to be short-term plans, yeah. But equally, I think we should all recognise that we are in this position because of the lack of concern for ecology by the human race in general in the past. Well, some of us anyway, not all. Yeah.
Chair, can I just make a point, if I may?
Yes, certainly, Mark.
Just to build on what the leader said, and also Councillor Spanswick said. That green space and the ability to go out for a walk or whatever is incredibly important in terms of people's well-being, and I think that's particularly been shown over the last 4 months. I think the challenge, and I'm going to bring this back to basics, the challenge will be we can't do everything. We'll still have a finite budget. We still don't know how much of our COVID expenditure will be covered by government. And we know we've got some increasing costs moving forward and loss of income that is significant. For example, increased council tax reduction scheme, less council tax collections, you heard this morning on CPA, loss of income in car parks, loss of income in sports fees, loss of income in rental. I make those points only because what Councillor Spanswick said may well be very valid, but at some point, what you put before Cabinet has to be prioritised. And when we talk about resetting the MTFS or relooking at the corporate plan, we're still going to have to prioritise, and we're still going to have to determine which of the many things we'd like to spend our money on are most important. So we know, for example, there's going to be a significant increased cost on homelessness. And I'm not comparing the two, but my point is we probably won't be able to do everything. So what we will have to do is think through all of these priorities and determine the best way in which we can achieve some of what we want within our finite budget. And I know that's probably obvious to everyone, but I do have to bring it back to basics because, unfortunately, despite the pandemic, as things stand, our forecast MTFS still requires us to make very, very significant savings over the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you for that, Mark. Right, I don't have anybody listed as wanting to ask a question, and I don't think it's check. I got Councillor Jane Gebby, actually. Did you want to come back in?
Yeah, sorry, Chair.
Yeah, and then it's Jane. I'll come to you then.
Just in terms of actually, making it a difference in what we do in terms of day-to-day operations, I think that our response, our swift response to Welsh Government when they asked for temporary active travel measures was the best example of what we actually do as an organisation. So some local authorities didn't apply and some weren't successful. We were, in terms of creating temporary active travel routes. Now you can have a debate about whether they were the right routes. or the value of them, but we did go for it, and we were successful, and that is about creating a more sustainable future, and we did that in very short time, and were successful. But it's also an example of where we are very much driven by Welsh Government, because of course they control the purse strings for the bigger purse, if you like, the much bigger purse. But they've also shown as well some commitment to, through funds like that, to a different way of working. So we will need to be ready to take advantage of funding like that in the future. And Councillor Spanswick will know that we were very successful in terms of the Valleys Regional Park. So I've been delighted to see the improvements underway at Parks at Nature Reserve and Bringarw Park. Now, there is talk in terms of the recovery that, as I said earlier, Welsh Government will want to invest more in those types of green infrastructure. So we do need to think about how we can be ready to take full advantage of that, so that Bridgend doesn't miss out. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much for that, Hugh. Yeah, I think you're quite right. We will have to think differently, and perhaps I think Councillor Smith this morning referred to blended learning. Perhaps there's going to be such a thing as blended working as well, working differently. So yeah, it's a very good point. Councillor Jane Gebby, you've made a very interesting comment here, and I think it's absolutely right that we have a bit of a discussion on it.
Thanks, Cheryl. There's been lots of people, lots of contributors to the debate this afternoon, and each one of you has made reference to the short, medium and the long term, but actually the short term to me is 2 weeks. And I know that short term, when you make reference to schools opening in September, that was still short term. So I'm really confused now as to what you want for short term, what you want for medium term, and what you want for long term. And I think we could do with some clarity around that. You're asking us to make speedy decisions on a weekly basis, mainly. You know, or that was the suggestion, Mark. I know that we can make up our own terms in relation to this recovery panel, but actually I think we need some clarity around what is the short term and what is the medium term, and what is it you actually want to look at short term, medium term, rather than just putting a panel together. And I feel like we're having a debate about who the constituencies are going to be, but actually we need more of a debate about what the content is going to be.
Thank you, Jane. Did you want to respond, Mark?
Indeed, I'm happy to respond. I mean, I think what's been apparent throughout the debate is that people's perceptions of what is short-term, medium-term and long-term are different. And so I think it's difficult for me to define it in a way that everyone would agree. I mean, just to be clear, I'm not, as I think Jane corrected, I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking you to shape and inform Cabinet's decisions. So to an extent, I think that's possibly something you need to spend time as a panel agreeing about. What are your initial recommendations? So you need to prioritise them. You need to be focused about what you think is going to make the most difference early on, and make your own decisions about which ones you think potentially are longer term priorities. Maybe the one, John may not agree, but maybe the one Councillor Spanswick just put is not something that has to be done, for example, for September's Cabinet, but clearly is important moving forward. But I think it's difficult for me to define and dictate that. I think it's something you probably need to spend some time going through the various issues and determining which ones you think you can add most value to for a report potentially to Cabinet in September. And bear in mind the key corporate documents I referred to. So if we're going to relook at the MTFS at the end of September, and if we're going to relook at the corporate plan at the end of September, then if you miss the boat for those, you might argue, well, any other recommendation you make is then really not going to be applicable until the next MTFS, which would apply from April the 1st next year.
Thank you, Mark. Do you wish to come back, Jane?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. But I think that's part of the problem here. Everybody's talking about short and medium term, and we don't actually know what the short and medium term is to each one of us, because it's something different to me as it is to you. And if we're trying to make these decisions, then I really do think we need to get on with it. So, but there's also something else I wanted to say. I heard John talk about green spaces and what's been happening and how we've delivered services. And Mark, you made reference to Bavo and different volunteering services. If we don't support that going forward, if there is another outbreak and we do lock down again, then we're going to be in significant difficulties, because some of those volunteers will not be there. And I don't feel like we're offering them full support going through. I mean, it's a bit like the government at the minute. The government have come out and said that they're going to support the furlough scheme until, what is it now, October, but then it might be January, but there's no definition. And I don't think we've given any definition as to what we want these people to do either.
Thank you for that, Jane. Would you respond now?
Yeah,
thank you.
Happy to respond. I mean, I think again, Councillor Gavey makes a very good point. For me, if, for example, we are looking at a potential, and there may not be one, of course, but if we are looking at a second peak sometime in the late autumn, then again, that to me would fall into one of the initial recommendations you would need to make to Cabinet if you felt that there was additional support, whether that's financial support or otherwise, that needs to go to Bavo and voluntary groups throughout the county borough to ensure that we can continue to deliver some of the things that work well actually during the lockdown, but perhaps are not sustainable without that additional support. So one of the I don't what we call them earlier, expert witnesses. One of the people you might want to call in is Heidi, and you might want to speak to Heidi about what does she think would be most helpful in terms of support moving forward. Now, again, you have to put that, and all of us have this responsibility, you have to put that in the context of the council's overall budget, because if we start dishing out millions everywhere, well, clearly we can't afford it. But I think some of these things are relatively inexpensive. It's about perhaps a change in the way we do things and a different way of thinking. So I would suggest that we need to embrace the way that relationship has really built over the last 4 months. And I think there's certain things we'd want to endure. And one of the things we need to be very careful about is that we don't revert to whatever the normal was in February or March inadvertently. And that might be one thing that we need to look at very carefully. Actually, we might think, well, do you know what? Unless we invest some time and effort in ensuring that relationship's put on a firmer footing, well, actually, the default position, isn't it, is that it reverts back to as it was before the lockdown, which would be a much more fragile relationship and a much less able and resilient third sector to be able to support us. So I think it's a point well made, and my own personal view, that would be one of the things that you might want to recommend relatively early on.
Chair, can I come in on the long-term, short-term, medium-term, and what that is, and people. Yeah, thanks so much, Chair. Yeah, you're right, Jane. It's different according to different people. I would certainly welcome the views of the panel on all the actions that we're going to take, whenever the time scale is. And one of the big advantages of you being a panel and not a full committee meeting is that you can hopefully meet at very short notice. So one of the lessons from this pandemic is that no one quite knows what decisions need to be made next when you've got a pandemic. And you've got to make the decisions very, very quickly. So we're still making decisions on a weekly, if not a daily basis, and we have very little time to make those decisions. So what we may find very helpful as the decision makers is that we can ask the panel to meet, perhaps even with a few days' notice, to test a decision that we have to make, because I think there will continue to be decisions to be made about how we respond to this pandemic in very short time. Particularly if there's a second wave, a third wave, and we have to respond to that. And also, even if there isn't, the economy and society is now changing at a very rapid rate, isn't it? We've seen that with job losses, etc. And UK and Welsh government are responding very rapidly, and therefore we have to respond very rapidly in terms of even if it's just how we administer different initiatives, and do we take part into certain projects and funds. So even if the pandemic itself becomes more stable to manage, I think the impacts will be felt for a long time, won't they? And there'll be a ripple effect, tidal effect of those impacts, and having you to be able to meet if you can at short notice, I think could be very helpful to our decision making process, because it does need that fleet of foot and that flexibility.
Thank you very much for that, Hugh. I have to say I've got a bit of a problem on my screen at the moment because it's shaking and shivering, and I don't know what the problem is. It was fine. It's been fine all day, but it suddenly started. So if I go, it's not my fault. It's because something is happening. I just asked my husband. He thinks that I could have a problem with this laptop. So my apologies if it goes. Right. Do we have anyone else that wishes to ask any questions of the leader or the chief on this? I think we all understand flexibility is obviously the buzzword, and that it will be down to the panel to sort of set timetables, and we've had advice on additional membership. Yes, Jane, you're indicating?
Yeah, Chair, I'm just wondering, would it be possible for some of us to do some of these meetings in the evening? Because that would be beneficial, especially if people are going back to work. I just, I think we can be a bit more flexible because we're not using the Civic, because we don't have to be out of there by 6:30.
No.
Yeah, absolutely, Jane. I think flexibility has got to be the buzzword here in order for us to be as effective as possible. We don't want to disenfranchise anyone. And the frequency of our meetings will be for us to decide. Obviously, things can change, as you were pointed out. Short term is the next 2 weeks. Things can happen. We may need to react. I think the timings of meetings is something we can certainly be flexible about. Thank you. Well, if there are no further questions, did you want to come in, Hugh?
Oh, yeah, just wanted to make a quick point around the Public Service Board, and how we need to give some thought with our partners on the Public Service Board as to how we make sure that the work that you do is aligned with the work that they will be doing, and also take advantage of the extraordinary expertise that sits on that board. So when we talk about expert witnesses, probably some of the most expert witnesses that you can have will be on that Public Service Board, because all our key public service partners are there, whether it's the police, the fire service, the health service, the third sector, Natural Resources Wales, the college. They're there. So it's how do we make them available to you, and do that so that we avoid duplication, and benefit most from that expertise. So that's something we can give some thought to with officers and with you.
Chair, if I may come in on that.
Certainly, Mark. Yes, come in.
Councillor Gebby asked me as well about the community impact assessment, and I had the benefit of meeting with Helen Hammond and Judith Jones earlier this week. And again, picking up the point the leader made, I think they're very keen that they don't do a piece of work in parallel. It really ought to be integrated, and it ought to be aligned so that, as I said earlier, we don't duplicate. So I think one of the first things you might want to do is meet Judith Jones and Helen Hammond to talk about the work the PSB are doing, because I think that will help shape some of the direction you go in, because I think there's a resource there as well which will help you. The fact that they're carrying out a community impact assessment, you may be able to influence that to some extent as well. So I would have thought that's one of your first calls, if that's okay. The other point I wanted to make, Chair, if you were wrapping up, is that Kelly has texted me to say that formally, if you want the option of increasing from 12 to 16, you need to formally change the terms of reference at this meeting. What that does is at least give you the option of going to 16 people, albeit there are some complications around political balance and all the other things we talked about, but you might want to at least give yourself the option by formally, in the Corporate Scrutiny Committee, changing the terms of reference to say that membership can be between 12 and 16 or whatever it is, that at least gives you that flexibility.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. Yes, I think that's what we will do when we come to our conclusions on this. And that's really what we hope to achieve this afternoon, is the agreement in principle that we could expand, and then the process that we use and who we expand it to, that can be sort of firmed up when we know exactly what we can and can't do. Can I thank you and Hugh very much for attending here? My screen is probably going to go up in a puff of smoke. You see what I'm seeing now? It's shaking. So I think I do have a problem with the hardware. Can I thank you very much? And then we will obviously reach some conclusion this afternoon, but I suspect it'll take us a little longer to identify exactly who we can and can't put on. Okay. We would have to do it in accordance with legal advice, obviously.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We look forward to the first meeting.
Yes, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. My God. Right, everybody. Rachel, are you there?
I am, yes, Chair.
Right. Now, I don't know at this point if you have any notes that you have made that you want to remind us of. I think we're all pretty clear, but you know, okay. I would appreciate your input here.
Right. Okay. Oh dear. Okay.
No, just salient points. That's all I'm looking at here, so that we all understand we're singing from the same hymn sheet. Even if it's different verses.
Would you like me to come in, Chair, before Rachel?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. I know Meryl's been messaging me frantically during the meeting to say she's got broadband problems and hasn't been able to join us this afternoon. But really, your discussions around increasing the membership of the panel from 12 to 16, that's the advice from legal that it would be absolutely in order to do that. It would need to be politically balanced. So we're talking about 2 additional Labour group members and another member each from the Independent Alliance and Conservative groups then to be added as co-optees then to the panel itself then. Probably the best advice really is that the group leaders nominate their additional representatives to be members of the panel, in addition to the members of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Picking up on the Chief Executive's point then, in relation to the work the Public Service Board are doing on the Community Impact Assessment, which is something that they're looking to complete in around September, and probably at one of your first meetings would be to invite the PSB team along to one of your first meetings of the panel, Chair. Picking up as well on the frequency of meetings. Obviously, we've got that flexibility that you can meet more frequently than monthly as well. My concern was in relation to meeting at later times of the day is the impact of some of the scrutiny team, whether we would have officers available to service at times, especially at the evening meetings. But that's something we can take a look at.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Yes, I had made a note already of Judith Jones and Helen Hammond would be probably the first invitees. But taking on board what Mark has said now, what we need to establish is that the terms of membership, we would wish to amend that to up to 16, to invite a further 4 people to join us on the panel. So I think I need somebody to move that when we come to the final recommendation. Has anybody got any, have you really all had your questions answered? I think really Mark has made it absolutely clear we can meet when we think we should be meeting, how often we should be meeting, and he has no problem with us extending it. Those are the only 2 main items earlier on this afternoon that we had. Does anybody wish to comment on that? I've got Councillor Jane Gebby as indicated and Councillor Nicole Burnett.
Hi Chair, I think my questions have been answered now.
Okay.
I do think we need to be more flexible. So Andrew, I take on board your comments about staff, terms and conditions, etc., etc. I fully appreciate employment rights. However, I do think it's something that we will need to consider.
Absolutely. Anybody else wish to speak?
Yeah, Chair.
Yes?
Right, yes please.
Well, no, the video's not working. Can you hear me? Am I there?
Well, if it's anything like mine, I sympathise with you because I'm practically going cross-eyed here with my screen. It's shaking. You all look as if you've got symphytis stance.
That's the BCBC tablet, the same as mine's dead.
Yeah.
Overheating.
Overheating, yeah. That's what my husband said.
Yeah.
Nothing I can do about it. Unfortunately, you see, this is again, we're not used to arranging these remote meetings. I had it on for 3 hours this morning. It only had a short period of rest, less than an hour, and then it was back on again, and here we are. It is overheating. There we are.
Right. Can I just come in and...
Yes, certainly.
I wonder if we can hear me, yeah, because my screen's off. I don't know what's happening.
No, we can hear you, John. That's all. That's the most important thing. I can't look at the screen for long anyway.
I mentioned about green spaces and the value of that in the future, and I accept the debate about medium long term. And then the chief exec saying, but it'll be down to financial commitments and what the priorities are. Yet in the reports now, we see culture, leisure, libraries. They are mentioned, and I don't put them any higher or lower than green space and parks, open spaces. So I don't see why we're not mentioning the future of our open spaces if we mention in the future of leisure and culture and libraries. They're all in the same ballpark, I would say, and there needs to be some recognition at this stage that needs to be addressed in the future.
I think perhaps that is something that the panel can address, really, John, and make some recommendations to that effect.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I see. Because we do need to be looking at all the vital things, and that is one of them. Whether it's a long-term aspiration or a short-term, it really doesn't matter. It needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed now, not at some distant time in the future. Because we haven't got that distant time to worry about.
Okay. Thanks.
Chair, could I come in, please?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. I was just wondering, Mark mentioned the possibility of us splitting up into working groups to tackle particular areas. Is that something that we could discuss now, and perhaps we could, state a preference as to what particular areas each of us are expert in or interested in, or so that we can sort of, because those are the sorts of groups that we could have meetings on in the evening without having support from democratic services, and then one of us can compile the notes and report it back to a larger meeting. And I think that could be more effective, because it's really difficult working with large numbers. It means that we have very, very long meetings, but if there's sort of 4 or 5 working on a particular subject area, we could pull things together perhaps a bit quicker. Jerry, your mic's off. There we are.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. To be honest, I can't even see because it's moving so fast. I can't see whether it's on or off. Yeah, I think, Nicole, what we could do is we could all email Scrutiny with what we do in our other lives, you know, what our expertise in, if we've got formal education in a particular area, and that then could be compiled into groups. I totally agree.
I think that's something, thinking of subgroup headings that we might pull together. I mean, I know certainly, I mean, I'm working sort of hands-on in the community. I'm seeing huge gaps, you know, in social services. I'm working and shopping for elderly people who were very active and sociable and very mobile 4 months ago, and now after being in lockdown for 4 months can no longer walk to the end of the garden path, and you know, there's a lot of things that have changed out there. Thank you,
I totally agree, Nicole. I think at this point we're all pretty much in agreement that there are very important aspects for us to look at when we do form the panel. So I would say if we go to the recommendations, we've already said we wish to change the recommendation, the actual number. We would like to potentially identify areas of expertise that we all have, and that can be emailed with those additional items. Are you all happy to approve the establishment of a cross-party recovery panel with the amendments that we have made and with the assurances of the flexibility that we've had?
Could we move on a seconder for that, please, Chair?
Yeah, I've been moving that, Chair.
To move the
second.
To the terms of reference to increase from 12 members to 16 members, and with the nominations to be submitted by group leaders.
If that's the legal advice, that's what we have to do.
Chair, is it correct to say that it's 12 members of corporate scrutiny with a co-option of 4 others?
With 4 plus 4 others.
Co-opted or whatever. So
whatever it is, because it's a panel, so it and again, Nicole's idea of having different groups. I mean, like yourself, John, I'm pretty sure what group you'd want to be outlined with, and that would be anything to do with the ecology, isn't it?
And waste. And health and safety.
I can't imagine that, John.
Oh, even better. Sorry, Okay, right. Are we all agreed then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Right, thank you very much. We now move on. I'm really worried that my tablet is just going to go puff. It really does look as if it's getting worse and worse. Forward work program update. You're going to take us through, Rachel?
Do you want me to do that? I'll take it.
You do it, Andrew. Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Take the committee
I mean, it's pretty straightforward, and then we'll have questions, and if anybody wants to add something in, that is absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Carry on, Andrew.
The purpose of this report is to provide members of the committee with a list of potential forward work programme items for formal prioritisation. And paragraph 4.1 of the report, this committee has the responsibility for setting and prioritising the overall forward work programme for the subject overview and scrutiny committees. In 4.2 of the report, you will see a table of items or topics which have been prioritised and agreed by this committee previously. The list has been compiled from suggested items at previous meetings of the overview and scrutiny committees, and also includes information proposed from corporate directors and so forth. I'll take the committee to the recommendations, which are to confirm the items prioritised as outlined in paragraph 4.2 of the report, and those items delegated to the subject overview and scrutiny committees, and to identify any additional items using the criteria form for future consideration on the scrutiny forward work programme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Right, does anybody have anything they would like to add in to this list of topics?
Yes, please, Chair.
No, everybody's agreed. Yeah, yes? Carry on.
If I can, Chair, yeah, I think it was on a previous list somewhere, and it's, well, we've done it partly, it's housing and there's the homelessness, and I'm a bit sort of unclear now where's the best place. So there's going to be the cabinet sort of work going on with national government and Welsh government with what's going to happen in the future with homelessness. But is there a role? There has been a role for scrutiny in the past. We looked at housing and empty homes, and now homelessness. Should that be somewhere higher up the agenda on the scrutiny, or will it conflict with what else is going on in the background with cabinet and the other sort of recovery panel? I'm not sure. Personally, I think it should be on scrutiny to look at homelessness now, but we don't want to duplicate what else has been done.
I think at this moment in time, the Welsh Government is very much going to be instrumental in how we are able to address this, and it will depend on resource, won't it, John? But I agree that scrutiny should play a role in looking at it as well, yeah.
Just for later down the road, a bit further down.
Yeah, totally agree. All agreed?
Yeah.
Chair, can I just say, could I just come in on, sorry, Jane, about the homelessness? I mean, you know, we were just saying, weren't we, about duplication? I mean, is there going to be a case of duplication if we're looking at homelessness? Because I think homelessness will really need to be sorted quite soon. You know, as we have them displaced in areas around the county borough, homeless people, and we're probably all aware that BCBC have looked into claiming some of the 20 million that the Welsh Government have provided for Welsh authorities, and I guess we're hoping for a reply back on that ASAP. You know, they can't keep authorities waiting forever, because we have to house the homeless that are housed in other parts of the county borough, because there is obviously a need now that they have been in accommodation to get them back into accommodation rather than them going back on to our streets. So I think you know, to push it through to scrutiny as well, I think we're going to be duplicating it, because it's going to be something that's going to happen soon.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nora. My personal feeling, there's going to be lots of office blocks empty that can be converted into homes for the homeless. But
what a good idea.
Working at home seems to be working very well for an awful lot of people, you know, and I'm going right across the board here. But I think what John is looking at and what he indicated is that we will need to have a look in the future at exactly how successful we have been in solving the problem for homeless. If I'm not mistaken, John.
Yeah, it's long term, I suppose. Yeah, it's long.
Yeah, okay, I agree with that.
Okay, right then, we'll...
Chair?
Yes, certainly,
Chair.
Jane, you come in.
Yeah, would it not be an idea for corporate overview and scrutiny to actually look at the PSB in September? Because they reckon that we're going to have the community impact assessment done by then. So that would have greater bearing on actually what we want to tackle and what we want to try and do.
Well, Jane, what I would point to is that this panel that we've just agreed to form will be meeting with Judith and Helen from the PSB. We'll be able to do it even sooner than September. You know, that would be the opportunity for us, I think, even sooner. So I certainly wouldn't want to shelve this now until September. I think it needs...
Oh, no.
Certainly this month.
Yeah, no. I think you're missing what I'm saying. If we're actually having a community impact assessment, that will identify where we've done things really well and what things we need to do longer term to manage any further spikes. So that's my thinking behind doing it, because because at the minute we don't know what's happening with schools, other than schools are reopening to all pupils in September. But schools have actually been told for the first 2 weeks they're to delay, and they're supposed to get it all sorted so that by the 14th of September, I believe it is, they've got to have every pupil back in school full term. Right, so the reality for me is by the middle of September, we're already going to have problems in school, especially if we have a second spike. Yeah. And I just think there's so many things that we need to look at. Homelessness is a long-term. John's right. You know, we really, really do need to look at this. Welsh Government have funded it. So why couldn't they have funded it a long time ago? Local government is being starved of money, and we're not doing anything about it because we're not being vocal about it, I don't believe. All right, so I do think we need to, I think that's something we need to consider so that we can then send whatever is on our work programme, we can identify going forward for whether it's Scrutiny 1, Scrutiny 2, Scrutiny 3, where it needs to go and who needs to tackle it, because I think it'll give us a better overview.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jane. I totally agree. We've been starved of money. We don't shout loud enough, perhaps, and perhaps we better learn how to do that. The trouble is we don't get the sort of empathy that the NHS gets. If you try to starve them, you'd soon know about it. Every front page of every paper. Right, Jane's been very clear about this. Are you all in agreement that that is something we should include?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how we're going to get all our schools back by the 14th of September.
Chair, could I come in on that?
I really don't know how physically it's going to work, but there we are. Yes, Nicole, you come in.
Sorry, I was just something that I've raised earlier in Scrutiny 1. Is can we do anything on the role of governors? And how governors are appointed and organised and trained, and how we have. I just feel that schools now more than ever need to have their governance as stable and as professional as possible. And I feel that a lot of schools are being let down. I don't think governors are being recruited properly. I don't think the right people are sitting on governing bodies. I don't think the training from Central South Consortium is effective or frequently enough, and I don't know how that could be sort of work, whether you could just centre just on governance itself, or how much we're reliant on Welsh Government. But I think particularly, I don't think all of our schools have got a full complement of effective governors, and that if they did, it would make a huge difference to how we respond to this crisis we're in.
It's my understanding, Nicole, that the only governors that the authority has any choice over is the LEA representatives. The others are down then. They're selected by parents, voting for them.
Yeah.
Or community, or the governing body agreeing that someone from the community. I sit on 2 governing bodies, and to be honest, they're very good. A broad range of expertise that is called on. But I can't be absolutely 100% on this, but I think it is only LEA and the cabinet appoints them. So that if I would have a word with Councillor Smith.
Will do then.
I think he would be the person, and being as he worked in that environment all his working life, you know, he'd be a good person.
We're not. It's just one area that I feel that we're not. Supporting schools as effectively as we could, and it's very hit or miss. It's a bit of a, you know, a postcode lottery as to whether a school gets the support it needs.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for that. I've got no other indications. Councillor Clark, did you want to? Did you just want to make the comment in writing, or did you want to speak?
I just wanted to make that comment. You know, I do agree with Nicole. I believe that governing bodies have got a lot more effective, but I still don't think they're effective enough.
Okay, thank you for that, Nora. But I think on this one, it's not really our remit. It is cabinet. We can advise cabinet by all means that they should be very careful who they do appoint, but in the main, I think their criteria is pretty good. You know, elected members either from BCBC or town and community, or somebody like retired teachers, etc., that have the relevant experience to make a contribution. Councillor Rod Shaw. Welcome, Rod.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And I'd just like to chip in if I can. It's my understanding as well that only LEA governors are appointed by the local authority. All other posts for governors are appointed by the school itself. In the past, I've proposed that more should be centralised to save head teachers, etc., becoming experts in absolutely everything under the sun, as well as the school. But that would mean a change in budgeting arrangements. Schools have autonomy on how they spend their money. And the final issue really is that it's right to say that not all governors seem to have the right acumen or skills, but in smaller schools, the issue is at getting any governors at all, let alone being able to pick from a list. So it's a complex area. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Rod. I totally agree. Sometimes it is difficult to fill a governing body. I've heard that from a number of sources. Right, well, if we're all finished, I'll take you to the recommendations at 9.1 with the other recommendations that have been made by various members. Are we all agreed?
Yeah.
Confirmed?
Yeah.
And we have identified.
Yes.
Confirmed? Yes. Okay. Right, well, I have no urgent items, thank goodness, because I don't think my eyes can take much more of this screen. I'm going squint. Can I thank you all very much for your attendance? I realise these are difficult times, but you know, I do think it's been quite a valuable meeting, and I can't wait to kick off with this panel now. It's going to be really interesting, and we can finally get to grips with some of the things that some of us have been quite frustrated not being able to make any contribution or be of any help. Thank you all very much.
Chair, before we go,
yeah?
Can I just ask, you know, are we setting an initial date for the first meeting or not, or are we just going to
ASAP, Nora?
Right. So
as soon as officers can get round to doing it.
Right.
I think that was made pretty clear.
Okay.
Yeah, I will chase up. I will discuss this with Meryl. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us today and I can understand that she's probably got the same problem.
Is Nora in a cell? It sounds like
Sorry?
Nora sounds like she's in a cell somewhere.
I'm not in a cell, honest.
Oh, I don't know. Martin Jones.
I blame Rod Shaw myself. I blame Rod myself.
That's a good idea. Yeah. All Rod's fault.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you.
Chair,
Thank you, Chair.
Take care. Stay safe.